Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andre Plourde, and as Dean of the Faculty of Public Affairs, I'm delighted to welcome you to the second annual Catherine A.H. Graham Lecture on Aboriginal Policy at Carleton University. Carleton University acknowledges and respects the Algonquin people, traditional custodians of the land on which the Carleton University campus is situated. I am honored to introduce to you Elder Thomas Lutit, who will open our event today. Born in Coral Rapids, Ontario, Thomas Lutit spent his early years in Moose Factory with his 8 siblings, his parents, and his maternal grandmother. At the age of 5, he was sent to Fort Albany Indian Residential School in Ontario, and later to Fort George in Quebec. By 1965, he was placed in the care of Children's Aid Society and spent the remainder of his youth in foster homes throughout southern and northern Ontario. In 1994, he completed the Ontario Native Education Program. As self-described Os Cap Bewis, a helper to the people, he is founding member of the Barrie Native Friendship Centre and has spent 20 years facilitating traditional healing circles, sharing his personal healing journey as a result of the Indian Residential School experience. Thomas also provides elder services for the Assembly of First Nations, Aboriginal Peoples Television Network, the Government of Canada, among others. Thomas and his wife Penny currently live in Ottawa. They have 2 children and 16 grandchildren. At this time, I invite Elder Thomas Lutit to open our event.
Sometimes I'm lost in words because it's really kind of hard to speak in this dry room. I'm used to being in the bush, and 70% of my time that's where I am, helping the youth working how to build a sweat lodge and how to build long lodges that we almost forgotten these days. And I'm going to do the opening in my language. Many years ago, I almost lost my language because of the residential school. Been there 8 years. I'm really honored to do this for you in my own language in Moose Cree. And I'll do that now. So I ask of you to leave book. Ega mina shemanento. Make what we didn't debate because Kunyan meaning to Pagani into Mutiano to Nikawi Kaski. More changa to Maxia and to go to Matan. To go to Matan to be Toyan Mina. Mina Magan we didn't make West. Mina Gitibeti Goskunian. Mina Gitibeti am Hitan, stay among Gibeti Mina Gomina, Gibeti am Hitan. I know Chaga will watch it to Maxian. To go to Matan to Nanaga Chatney, New Jogan and the Niki Kashitat. I go Maganesta, Nanaga Chiagan, Stone Josh from Shak and Dekashitatic. Okay, Magagani Butchek, Nanaga Chik. Masker kasut tamok ko kanu na pega betit tabatamot. Ega maganestan ni moshum niko kom beju itapinanaxko. The bejinanaga chinan. O can we to tamakota. I'm really great honor to be here, to be invited. The protocol that I carry is the tobacco always up in front. When you ask a favor of that person, I don't call myself an elder. I'm a squaw bears. A squaw bears means a helper to the people and a helper to the elders. For many years I walked this way, over 30 years, that I've been alcohol free. And my kids, they follow this way. They're alcohol free too. I don't force them to go to church. I respect all cultures, all believers. We all have one high power. It's the Creator. I offer my tobacco for the sick people when I'm out in the bush. I offer my tobacco for those people that need to be prayed for, and those ones that passed on over a year ago. have a feast for them in the bush. I spend lots of time in the bush. Trees talk to me. The animals talk to me. In my own way, I talk to them. I feel free. Being in residential school for a long time. When I was growing up, I never hit my kids. I never returned that favor to my kids. Sexual abuse twice, physical abuse lots of times. And I thank the Creator for having me here today. You wake me up every morning with a smile. And I thank Him for that, for Him to having me here. And I'm really honored to be here today. And I'm proud that I could be able to speak that Cree language again. And I'm really thank you for having me here.
So thank you, Elder Lutet, and we do have a small token of our appreciation. So. We're privileged and honored that you were with us here today. Once again, welcome everyone. This lectureship is named for Catherine Graham. She's Professor of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton. Beginning in 1968, Professor Graham served as Associate Dean of Research in the Faculty of Public Affairs and was appointed Dean of the Faculty in 2003. She served as Dean for 6 years, after which she was appointed Senior Advisor to the Provost and Vice President Academic. She's now serving as Interim Associate Vice President Academic. Catherine's own research focuses on local governance, community development, Aboriginal policy, and policy processes. As Associate Dean of Research in the Faculty of Public Affairs, she encouraged action-oriented research and policy innovation by researchers, students, and centers in all fields, from weapons in space to refugees in downtown Ottawa, with partners in all sectors, government, civil society, and business. Her leadership as Dean solidified the collective identity of this unique and vibrant faculty, a faculty that leads every day in areas that are important to every aspect of Canadian society. During her tenure as Dean, she hired a cohort of new faculty members whose drive for excellence and creativity is producing a steady flow of new projects, conferences, courses, and publications across all fields in public affairs. She led successful fundraising initiatives involving the McConnell Foundation, Bell Canada, the Royal Bank, as well as securing broad-based support for Kruger College, scholarships and academic chairs from private and public donors. Catherine is also known for her excellent work in championing community service learning. With Sonia Bata, she pioneered the Carleton Batawa Initiative, a collaboration between Carleton University and the Batawa Development Corporation to make the community of Batawa a model for sustainable community development. She chairs Community-Based Research Canada, a national network of universities and community-based organizations fostering community-university research engagement. In addition to all this, Catherine has demonstrated a long-standing commitment to engaged research on Aboriginal policy. She served as an advisor to the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples and to numerous Aboriginal government and policy organizations. She has conducted research on issues facing Aboriginal citizens in urban centres, governance models for northern communities, and the challenges and opportunities associated with Aboriginal education. She has been a champion of the public administration program delivered in Nunavut by Carleton School of Public Policy and Administration. This lectureship was established in recognition of Catherine's contributions to Carleton University and to the field of Aboriginal policy. Catherine being Catherine, she will want the focus of the event in her honour to be on the substantive issues of the lecture, and the spotlight to be on our remarkable speaker, National Chief Shawn A-in-chut Atleo, but Professor Graham herself deserves to be honoured for her record of achievement and her contributions to Carleton, to Ottawa, to Canada, and indeed to the world. We are extremely privileged to have National Chief Shawn A-in-chut Atleo deliver a lecture this afternoon. At this time, I invite Carleton University President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Roseanne O'Reilly-Runta, to introduce him to you.
Thank you very, very much. I am so pleased that we have this lecture in honor of Catherine Graham. It is a tribute to her and all she's accomplished at Carleton and around the world. But it's also a tribute to the inspiration that she gave all her colleagues, because she was a great fundraiser, and her colleagues, led by Ted Jackson, said, you know, we've got to do something. If she can do it, we can too. And together, people came together to make this lecture possible. So we were imitating your success. And so please consider this your own work as well. And I'd like to thank you all for being here. This is a wonderful day. I'd like to thank the elders who came in from the bush and who gave up some of this beautiful sunshine to be with us today, but I'm sure it will be worthwhile. I'd like to thank everyone else who is very busy but took time to be inspired. Now, both of the elders that I know are here, and there are probably more that I don't know. Usually when they bless us, hope and pray for our wisdom, and that's usually the final word. And it's somewhat ironic because, you know, if anybody needs wisdom, it's the people working in a university. And I think that the word wisdom is the word I'd like to use to describe our speaker today. Now, when I look at what he's done, he's been a leader, a facilitator, a mediator, a planner, a teacher. But somebody who does all of those things needs to be a wise person. And I like to think that there's a difference between information and knowledge and wisdom. And when you think of a wise person, usually you think of somebody with white hair. And that doesn't mean if you don't have white hair, you're not wise, because our speaker is indeed wise. But what does that white hair symbolize? It symbolizes experience. And this person has a great deal of experience. The wisdom also means ethical behavior. When somebody has the wisdom of Solomon, they know what to do in a really difficult situation. They're able to weigh all of the options and come up with the right path. And I think Chief Atleo has demonstrated throughout his career his ability to find that right path and to inspire other people to do that. Now, he might have gotten a little inspiration himself through his education, and I note that he has a Master's of Education in Adult Learning and Global Change from the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia, in partnership with the University of British Columbia, the University of Western Cape, South Africa, and the University of Linköping, Sweden. A former student, perfect for Carleton. Somebody who studied in an international program. What better speaker could we have for a campus like ours? Someone who studied a program that was truly interdisciplinary is also the perfect speaker for this university, which prides itself on being both interdisciplinary and international. His knowledge and his wisdom was recognized when the University of Vancouver Island named him the first Indigenous Chancellor. And I will tell you that some time ago, we had a committee looking for a chancellor. And people said, my goodness, too bad the University of Vancouver Island got there first. So we congratulate you on that award and the responsibility that it entails. He's served two terms as regional chief of the BC AFN, And during this time, he was committed to the principles of working together through inclusion and respect. In March 2005, an historic leadership accord was signed, overcoming decades of discord among First Nations leadership in British Columbia. You have demonstrated your knowledge, your wisdom, and the skills to be a leader. And today, you have assumed an important leadership role, which has much responsibility, but enormous opportunities. And we know that you have the wisdom to meet all of the challenges with which you'll be faced. And we are deeply honored that today you'll share some of that wisdom with us. We welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President, for that kind introduction. And maybe this is the opportunity for me to say that I was interested in pursuing a doctorate, a PhD, and so I still anticipate that I want to do that, but I've bumped into this job for now. But I'll be back. I'll be back. My daughter's finishing her BBA, and she says, Dad, I'm going to be the fourth person in our family to get a doctorate degree, and she's 22. And I was racking my head saying, well, what do you mean? Well, who was the third? She says, well, you, Dad. You're going to have to go back and get your doctorate. So I've got my kids pushing as well. It is indeed a great privilege to be here and to learn about the legacy that Catherine Graham has with this institution, and to be invited to share some thoughts here in honor of that work in the area of this important aspect of policy in this country is indeed a great privilege. So thank you so much for having me here. And Elder Ludit Tleko Itsush Tsekshet Netnieksu. I know that I heard you say that you don't see yourself as an elder. And so in the best of my expressions in my language, I want to thank you, grandfather, as the elder person in our families for leading us in prayer, and join in the acknowledgement that we're here in Algonquin territories. It has been a wonderful day that we've had. We've had conversations on Parliament Hill, and when I look at the picture behind me, and I think as the conversations that I had coming in around the issues of policy, my first question was, wow, Carleton's right here in the national capital. I wonder what it must be like. I wonder what the legacy is of conversations like those going on, for those who can't see the picture of the group of people standing right in front of Centre Block on Parliament Hill. And it makes me think about the history of institutions like this, work like that which you've led, deep thinking about the things that we care about in our society. And so it's in that respect that I come here to bring some thoughts from an Assembly of First Nations perspective, but I also come from my own perspective as A-in-chut in the introduction, coming from Ahousaht, New Channel Territories, the west coast of Vancouver Island, little community about 40 minutes by boat northwest of Tofino, if you've ever been out there. That's my home. My wife Nancy and I always feel like we're a long ways away from home, and we're learning about your winters, about your summers. This will be the third winter coming up so far for us. And I have arrived in this role 2 years after spending 2 terms as regional chief, feeling very strongly in my heart that we had arrived at a special time in our history, and probably every generation has that, right? This must be the time. This must be the time when we can see something happen when it comes to the issues that we want to talk about today. And we've sort of titled this intervention here under the topic, and Elder, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about this title that we have, Realizing Reconciliation, Smashing the Status Quo. It sounds sort of very hard-edged, and what we're really looking to do is to realize harmony and peace and relationships that are fulfilling, that are mutually respectful, that in our language we would say hishuk nish tsawak, that we are all interconnected and one with an undercurrent of respect and caring and loving of one another. And so in contrast with our title, it seems like that is probably the best way to describe really what the intentions are and the thoughts that I wanted to share here. We were down on Victoria Island, And I think about the acknowledgement of the Algonquins, and we reflect on the loss of William Commanda, an incredible man, passed away at the age of 97. Think of what that man has seen over the course of his lifetime, the things that he's experienced and the vision that he had. He was the great-grandson of one of the hereditary Algonquin chiefs. The hereditary system that he came from is one that I recognized. It's one that I'm still anchored within in my own village of Ahousaht. And so achieving reconciliation, having relationships return to where they could be, is something that's ongoing within and amongst ourselves as Indigenous peoples as well. And I use that term, recognizing the legal and modern application of the term Aboriginal, but also recognizing that the Canadian Constitution talks about First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit, the three distinct Indigenous peoples of this country. I, in the role of National Chief, have the responsibility to support and uphold the First Nations of this country, the over 600 communities, over 50 languages, and they are the treaty and rights holders. It is they and their citizens, not I in my role as National Chief. So I just wanted to begin by clarifying that and thinking as well about the history that we all are stepping into, one that William Commanda reflected on and was seeking to inspire us all. In fact, he wanted to have a center on Victoria Island. Let's support that vision, a place for Indigenous peoples to continue to come together. And I know that you've had others like Mary Simon come and speak here. I really admire, respect, and appreciate her and think of her as one of my many leadership mentors. Watch very closely and carefully how it is that she advocates and supports the Inuit people that she serves. And I'm very thankful to have been raised by and born into a family that values education. Both my parents are professors. My father was my first teacher and my first principal, and the strap was still legal when we were in the school back then. So I'm not the only one who is saying to Dad, maybe I did deserve that strap that I got. The focus on education came really from my late grandmother, who passed away at the age of 87, raised 17 kids. And when she left us, which wasn't that long ago, she says, "Grandson, we no longer fight our fight with our fists any longer. We fight our fight with education." And she raised all of her children to have that sentiment, which is what compelled somebody like my father to become the first graduate of an academic doctorate degree amongst First Nations, at least from the University of British Columbia. And I always love his stories because he tells them, like the academic warrior that he is and that he was at the time, he says, "Give me your toughest on this thesis defense. I don't want you to give me anything but the toughest." Standing firm that our people have, as opposed to what was thought, the potential and the potential for genius and intelligence like any other people. And we will always have to remember that we stand on the shoulders of so many who have come through difficult times, like the residential school era that we are now coming as a society to learn so much more about. My dad, like his dad, were both raised as a small boy. Like I remember, even the age of 5 or 6, being chased down the beach to go for the morning prayer swim. Dupsuis, we call it in our language, in the west coast of Vancouver Island. And as the elder has helped to reflect here, that this notion of pursuing support or learning from the spiritual realm is not something left over as an appendage, as just a nice aside or a formality, that in fact it is inextricably linked with the notion of learning. We go to the spiritual realm for the support and to learn and to acquire the power for success in life. And so it is amongst our people. We have unbroken succession of proof that works. We have the ceremonies that still are practiced to this day. And so we don't disconnect them from the very best of thought that occurs in institutions of higher learning like this one. And we can reflect back on our history and think about how it is that we have related to one another. My colleagues have gotten tired of me constantly referencing the book written by David Hackett Fisher about Samuel de Champlain, called Champlain's Dream. And we have increasingly thinkers, in this case an author, who helps us to reflect differently about those first relationships that were blossoming here in the Atlantic side of the country. about the advent of trade, about political relationships that began to flourish, that the fur trade that sprouted up here in the Atlantic, that was very much done in cooperation with the Indigenous peoples. In fact, acknowledging that that part of the river is okay, but upriver, that's our territory. So early on, we saw this negotiating of space, and while there was a recognition to support the newcomers, and there was an encouragement to build a relationship, there was an understanding that the peoples of these territories do indeed have laws, morals, systems of government that had always been in place. And we see David Hackett Fisher in his reflections as a thinker who in today's context is helping us to unpack some of that history that has yet to really been told. And so realizing reconciliation, bringing harmony back into our relationships requires us to a certain extent to unpack some of this history. And that's important work that can go on and be led by institutions of higher learning like Carleton through the work that you undertake here in your studies. It does speak to the amount of work, though, yet to do, because to speed ahead to this moment in history, we can quickly see the depth of the gap that has arisen. A move away from the original relationships like the one that Samuel de Champlain was working to forge. A move away from both the post and pre-Confederation treaty making, where through ceremony our collective ancestors, those of the Indigenous peoples and the newcomers, in sacred ceremony, they sought to find relationships with one another that would be harmonious. I really love the expressions in Treaty 3 in Northern Ontario. You may be familiar with these specific treaty articulations where it says, you give me time with your son and or daughter so that I might teach them about who I am, and I'll do the same too. You take my son or daughter so that you might teach them about yourself. It's such an incredibly beautiful sentiment that the ancestors had instructed us to do. And somewhere we went awry. We have separated on that path. But that's okay. We can reflect on that and we can put it back to where it was. We can fulfill the sentiment of that. And we only need to look at the realities. The ceremony in our community that we do, the Tlukwana, which was a ceremony that was outlawed by law for a long time. It seeks to put reality front and center so that we can collectively share an understanding, which is desperately lacking in really today's world, is a shared notion of what the challenges are and a shared notion about how we might overcome them. And so the social ills that our people face, which we continue to hear a litany of experience that First Nations are experiencing, the social ills, the high rates of suicide. We marched together at Kitigan-Zibi. Caitlin is here somewhere. We marched together thinking about the missing young women from Kitigan-Zibi, which is not far from here. 2 young women of over 500. And we continue to stand strong together and reaching out to Canadians to say, you know, our people are not disposable. Our people are just as human, and the lives of our people are just as precious as anyone. And so that is the original vision, and we find ourselves at times feeling numb to those sorts of statistics. It just seems so huge. Rates of TB and diabetes, and the exposure to unsafe and unclean drinking water. We saw what happened up in Piganjicum, young people taking their own lives. And where does this sense of despair and feeling of hopelessness, where does it come from? That isn't the dream that the ancestors, it isn't the dream that Hackett Fisher says that Champlain even had. In fact, the reality has become quite different. And I've had the opportunity in this job, the great privilege, to be in so many of our communities. I recall a young man, 14 years old. I think I'm the same height as him, which is easy to remember. We can see eye to eye. And we were in a youth-led conference, and I find that the youth are increasingly, Caitlin, stepping forward and grabbing issues by the hand. And this young man from Fort Capel, 14 years old, he says in a bit of a rap cadence, he says, "The res is hard. It leaves you scarred." And he captured for his peers the feeling of our people, of fear, of a sense of despair, and in a sense of hopelessness as well that he was articulating, and it resonated. Now, mind you, the session didn't really end like that. It ended with a sense of commitment that they can change things, though. This has been the experience, but we can make a difference, and we can have something better result in our communities. I know some of you may be aware of the story of Shannon and Shannon's dream, Shawn A-in-chut Atleo. The story is really remarkable. She was in grade 8 at the time, and she convinced her peers that they should cancel their graduation ceremony, that they should instead raise money and go to Ottawa and press the case that her community deserves a school. Grade 8, putting us adults on her shoulders and saying, this is where we must go. And she did. She went and pled her case to the Minister of Indian Affairs at that time. Tragically, she's passed on. But her legacy lives on in an effort called Shannon's Dream. And she has inspired young people across this country, and she's inspired Canadians to join an effort to say that every kid deserves a school in their communities. That's all Shannon wanted. She never went to a real school. And she found support, though. She found that kids from Ottawa were supporting this effort. And so that movement is really continuing. And it's remarkable that we would have, in many respects, somebody like Shannon step forward. But on the other hand, it is absolutely what I would expect increasingly to see. And that is our young people stepping forward and saying, First Nations, Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit and Métis, I hear this all the time, you've got to work together. Continue to overcome divisions, the likes of which you didn't create for yourselves, borders that you didn't create. You need to find ways to overcome the challenges that you have in your relationships and support one another. And we have a growing awareness in this country. Thankfully, the outgoing Auditor General, Sheila Fraser, she did 32 audits, and she reported a deep and growing gap between First Nations and the rest of the country. Important reflections for all of us when we think about this from a policy context. How is it that we got here? And more importantly, what are the things that we need to do to change that? We also find that in a moment like this, when we've come through an economically challenging times, I have, like I did all day today, reporters say, well, Shawn, you know, there's not much there in the coffers. This is a time of austerity. What about the needs for First Nations? What are you expecting? Well, when the coffers were full, there wasn't the resources required. So I'm not sure. What is it going to take? It really does feel like it will require a shared sense amongst us, First Nations, Indigenous people, Canadians alike, that we've got to do something to smash the status quo. We must do something to invest in these young people. They are, after all, the fastest growing segment of the Canadian population. The vast number are under the age of 25. This growing gap in the conditions in our communities happens at a time when the federal bureaucracy is, in essence, ballooning. We've seen the federal bureaucracy that rules by remote control our people grow to over 5,200 employees. It's a 22% increase. So we see what's going on with this growth there, while, as Sheila Fraser said and reflected back, that gap is deepening. And it's very clearly and very easily recognizable how wrong this is, and that we've got to do something about it. Our people for a long time have been taking these messages to the international arena, Organization of American States, to the United Nations, and have fought for a long time to have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples forged and endorsed. And thankfully, Canada has. After a lot of lobbying and a lot of intense pressure and conversations on steps just like this one, Canada has endorsed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Now, the next step is to get on with the implementation of the Declaration, which compels for First Nations to be full partners in designing a way forward. And when it comes to issues that impact their territories, to have full, free, prior, and informed consent. This is the new international minimum standard. It's the direction that the courts have been going, over 40 court cases affirming Aboriginal title rights and treaty rights in this country. It's entrenched in Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. But those are all very fine words that are requiring us to find ways to actually implement on the ground so that our people can feel and taste the change in their communities and be a part of realizing that change amongst ourselves. So this this brings us to some of the how of doing this work. And my interest in being in a role like this is, as I alluded to earlier, coming from a hereditary role, we have the realities as well of the Indian Act, an act that none of us in this room created, but we all share, I think, the notion that something has to be addressed here. It has not served our people. It certainly is a reality. There are concerns about the notion of just pulling it away unilaterally. What we really need to do is go back to those original relationships and implement the spirit and intent of the treaties, implement the UN Declaration, implement Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. At this moment, we can essentially break this down into 4 major areas. The need to reset the First Nations Crown relationship. And the Prime Minister has agreed to have a First Nations Crown meeting potentially as early or as soon as this coming January, December or January. It's looking like January. An opportunity for First Nations governments to have a direct conversation with the federal Crown, to reset that relationship and have it based on our rights, based on the treaty relationship. Secondly is to engage in really what's required, and that is new fiscal relationships. I find that many Canadians are shocked to learn that First Nations learners, our children, are the only segment of the Canadian population who do not have a statutory guarantee for funding for education. It is subject and up to the whims of policy or program line items within the federal government. So when we begin talking about policy and policy challenges, when we pull apart where some of our struggles are, First Nations having been under a 2% cap for funding since 1996, while most recently, we all remember, the federal government promised and has lived up to the promise to protect transfers to provinces and territories for education and health at over 6%. So the issue of a new fiscal relationship is really required, and I only touch on one area, and that's education. The implementation of First Nations governments is the third area, and that requires respect for and support for those governments to thrive. It means also creating new institutions that will support the capacity of First Nations governments. It also means supporting the development of an Indigenous public service. And these are all areas that institutions of higher learning can provide significant supports for. And the last area is structural change. We're talking in some respects about the machinery of government and how they work. But we're talking about ideas that are not new, that I'm not bringing on my own, but that in fact have been around for a while. In New Zealand, they have a tribunal, the Waitangi Tribunal, and that helps to facilitate the relationship between the Indigenous rights holders and the state. First Nations in Canada have been seeking such approaches as well, to have some independence and some fairness. These treaties that I speak of are recognized as being international in nature. The UN Declaration compels Canada to support the implementation of those treaties, as Canada is a successor state to treaties that pre-existed the formation of the country. So we're talking about business that in fact goes back not only to the formation of Canada, but goes back to even further than that. So the Crown gathering, the meeting that we are seeking to have with the Prime Minister is about resetting the relationship. It's about setting an agenda going forward that will hopefully break the lurching from conflict to conflict that we've experienced, the unilateralism of Ottawa deciding what is in the best interest for First Nations and then implementing it through the way they give expression to that work, and that's through legislation. We find ourselves constantly going to Ottawa, going to Parliament and saying, that particular bill is not going to do what you're suggesting that it will do. And we need help drawing the curtain back of the reality of what First Nations face. And we're reaching out for support, and I am so thankful. I am so full of gratitude that Canadians are stepping up and stepping forward to engage in the debate, engage in the discussion, learn about the issues so that we can overcome the fear that seems to grip us, that holds us back. The fear of both the engagement on the part of First Nations with governments, because look at the history of the mistrust. The rugs being pulled out from underneath us has brought this great fear about engagement and mistrust with governments. By the same token, it seems like that governments seem to have a real problem with recognizing that we as Indigenous nations not only pre-existed, but we still exist now, and we're not going anywhere. To recognize that the over 50 Indigenous languages 3 of which are only poised to survive fully intact into the future. Is this not also a rich part of the cultural heritage of this country for all of us to embrace and determine how it is that we keep those? There is no resources for language training in our program funding for schools. And so when I expressed to the Prime Minister that how appreciative I was that he stood in front of my late grandmother and apologized for the legacy of residential school, encouraging him then to support, if education was used as a tool to hurt, to hold back, to disconnect, to remove language, culture, should not education now be the tool of freedom for our people, the reconnection, to have our languages put back to where they were so that they can flourish and be retained? And we can't do this on our own. And that's the reason why we've been reaching out to school associations, to student associations rather, to the union, to civil society, to NGOs, to the business, to industry, to large corporations. And so we're very, very happy that Canadians are more and more standing with us and walking with us. We can make compelling social justice arguments about the reasons why it's right for us to seek reconciliation, for us to seek a return to harmony between our peoples, between and amongst ourselves. We can also, if necessary, and I believe it is, we can make compelling economic arguments that if in one generation, if we close the education and the labor market gap, this can, as economists have told us, result in a $400 billion contribution to the Canadian economy and $115 billion savings in government expenditures. There is a powerful, powerful economic argument made that keeping us in poverty is very expensive to this country. It is very expensive to the lack of human potential. It is, in fact, life and death. And so this conversation this evening, the notion of pursuing reconciliation, I absolutely believe in my heart, otherwise I wouldn't have stepped into a role like this, I would have gone straight to my PhD, that are we now at the tipping point in this conversation? Is this not the time in history when those future generations look back and they say that was the time that they smashed the status quo? They said this is so completely unacceptable that we are prepared to do something about it. Canada enjoys a tremendous international human rights reputation, deploying clean drinking water to Africa, building schools in South America. We need 60 schools right now in First Nations in this country. And we need to ensure that institutions of higher learning like this are filled with Indigenous learners who are not only remaining anchored in their identity and where they come from, but they do so because institutions like this are supporting an embedded type of learning that is perhaps democratic is one way to describe it, that allows our learners to bring their context with them, and that it helps to enrich institutions of higher learning. That's where I see schools like Carleton being at the forefront of facilitating the kind of change that we require. I suggest that the rate and pace of this change, we can change the trajectory from this and we can have it go skyward. I'm hoping that that's the case. I'm asking if it's not at all possible that this is the tipping point in addressing our issues, achieving reconciliation, and smashing the status quo. Thank you for the opportunity to share some words here this evening.
So Chief Atleo has graciously accepted to answer questions from the audience.
Hi, Chief Atleo. My name's Kelly. I'm a VIU graduate and a PhD student here at Carleton. I'm from the Coast Salish territories of Vancouver Island. I'm also VP Operations at the Student Association here, the Graduate Student Association. And in my job, I encounter a lot of myths about education for Aboriginal Canadians, particularly this, you touched upon it in your talk about this idea that all Indigenous peoples get free education, this kind of thing. That's just one of them. But I'm just wondering, when you speak of reconciliation, do you think that it needs to happen with the government first, or that we need to maybe work in terms of Canadian society in general, sort of dispelling some of these ideas and these myths, or does it happen all at the same time? Thank you.
I was going to ask you the same thing. I think in part, I think the question is in part the answer. Otherwise, it would have happened by now. And perhaps it's a concurrent effort, but that your first point links to the question, and that is the myths that you speak about. They reflect a lack of understanding. A lack of understanding can facilitate a fear-based relationship. And by and large, I still believe that we have predominant a fear-based relationship based on a lack of understanding and myths. And if no other place than education on two fronts, for Indigenous young peoples to be supported, they've got a dual-fold exercise that are underway that I alluded to about my father's pursuit, and that is to overcome systems that have not otherwise been supportive. And so we find Indigenous learners are like they're the outliers that Malcolm Gladwell speaks of, accomplishing not because of, but in fact, in many cases, despite full supports. Imagine what we were to do if we were to support all of our learners in our communities. So I believe that it's a concurrent exercise. I also feel strongly that, Canadians can encourage the leadership, of which there's two types. Gandhi said, "There goes my people, I must follow them." We see what's happened in the Middle East. We've seen where peoples can take responsibility for their society and do things that are required to move them forward in a better way. And certainly I feel it's absolutely necessary that we reach out to Canadians, because this is not a separate conversation. Treaties belong to all Canadians as well, regardless of whether you've just arrived here on these shores or your family has been here for 10 generations. What we haven't done is worked on how to give effect to the spirit and intent of those treaties and that relationship. And so the education is not only of our Indigenous peoples. We need a major effort amongst Canadians to support people to understand, so we can overcome the myths and move beyond the fear, and suggest that with confidence that we can smash this status quo and make the changes that are required and unleash human and economic and other potential. For me personally, it's about achieving social justice as well, and I think we will stand firm, we will speak out, and we will speak loudly, and we will support the young people, and in fact encourage them to do so. So I really appreciate that, and congratulations on your studies as well, Kelly.
My name is Gabrielle Fayant, and I just wanted to say that I really liked when you gave the eagle feather at Jack Layton's funeral. I thought that was really amazing and much deserved towards Jack Layton. So my question is related to harmony. I completely agree that we have to work with non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal people to create harmony, as well as we have to work within Aboriginal communities locally, provincially, and nationally. So if the youth councils from the 6 national Aboriginal organizations were to work together for a joint statement at the UN, for the next UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, what would you say the topic should be on?
Do you know what you think that you would like for it to say?
Well, I've heard some of the youth say they want to do it on like an international perspective. So they were thinking of access to water for Indigenous people.
I think that would be remarkable. If we think about the fact that today I had a chance to be invited to the NDP caucus, and I got a little choked up because of missing the late Jack Layton. When I received news, I was sitting in my home where Nancy and we hosted Olivia and late Jack. And irrespective of political affiliations, to me, he always came across as genuinely concerned, interested, supportive, and would be helping us to reflect on ways that we might advance our issues. And but I also think that in some ways his loss and the outpouring surprised us, and perhaps touched a part of the humanity that can sometimes be lost. And for that reason alone, I think it was a remarkable moment, and I was greatly honored to be a part of it. I also reflect on conversations I've had with the leaders, prime ministers in this country, and to pick up on the earlier point that Canada has always enjoyed this international human rights reputation. And yet there's every reason why we can also be a leading nation on Indigenous relationships with the state, that there is every reason where Canada should take up the challenge to address issues like water, to work with First Nations to ensure that we have access to clean drinking water, that our people aren't vulnerable to being sick because of poor conditions in our communities, which is a reality. But we can also, and we have, I think, not just amongst the youth. By the way, I love the youth unity push. It's like saying to the adults, get over your differences. This is how it's done. And I want to commend you for that, and I want to encourage you to continue to do that. And eventually, I think, you know, if you want to call them the older adults, because I'm now getting older, I'm realizing, the white hair is coming. And we'll be there to support you. We'll be there to support the vision that you have. That's the old way of our people, which is why I ask you. I find myself speaking too much in this work. I love to listen. And every voice to be included, but more importantly, to be understood. And that's the way in which we've asked our youth to participate fully in the work of the Assembly of First Nations across all of our portfolios. And so I'm very thankful for that, and I would encourage you.
My name is Hilary Tnut, and I am from Nayashaniming Cape Croker, the Chippewas and Nawas First Nation. I'm a student here at Carleton University. I'm doing my PhD in sociology. First, I just wanted to extend a miigwech and thank you for your gratitude for being a very inspirational and innovative leader for our people. You've put our voice first, and it's greatly appreciated and much needed. I really want to commend you as well as for your attention to pay towards cross-cultural collaboration with the state and how important that is. And when we look at something like youth suicide, for example, and we have the state interventionist programs like the National Aboriginal Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy. My question is, given we need this sort of state collaboration, at the same time, what does this do towards self-autonomy and governance for our people that is so needed? And no, I don't know how to answer that question.
We have a phrase in my language that is called up high stat. It's a simple phrase that says talks about being friendly. We hear it by the elders all the time. Be kind, be loving, don't seek to hurt others, and be friendly. And the idea of being friendly is that if your neighbor is in need of a cup of sugar, make sure you come ask me for my sugar so that I can make sure that you have the sugar that you need. It's this relational notion that Indigenous people still, in my view, in my observation, have still so very strongly, and we're not the only cultures, but it's still there, even though it's been hurt, it's been in tatters. And when we had 65 suicide attempts and several successful suicides in my village in 1 year, my community said we need to go back to that sentiment. And we reached out, and the elders said, Shawn, you need to talk to the people out there and say, you know what, we just can't do this on our own right now. We need some support, because up high stuff, it's unfriendly not to reach out and to ask for support to work through a heavy and a difficult time. The effort that was unleashed at that time had nothing to do with any policy anywhere. It was a movement of people that gravitated, and they brought their energy, their resources, and they asked our people what they wanted. And what resulted could be described as some programming, some initiatives. But since that time, I can't recall there being a successful suicide in my village. And the amount of attempts has gone down so deeply and so drastically. So what was the magic there? It was around relationships. It was around recognition. It was about being medicine for each other. It was about being empathetic. It was about beginning to learn about each other. It was breaking down those myths and those stereotypes. And it was not just saying that, how is it we don't care about you? It was saying, how is it actually we care about you? As a nation, we can do this, and we can become, as I think the late Jack Layton was aspiring, wanted us to all aspire for, sort of a kinder, more civil society. And I believe that institutions of learning can and must increasingly move from developing people as human capital for a market economy and as being actors in a more civil society. So that was one experience where we reached out, and it took a deep tragedy, but we wanted to enact the principles of the old treaties, even though we don't have them in our territory. But the principle is the same. So when we hear about community like Pikangikum having lost young people to suicide, when the chief coroner writes a report that reflects back to us what some of the fundamental issues are, that's not new information. That's been around a long, long time. Making sure that the kids have educational supports. When I travel into the villages and land on the dirt strips in northern Ontario or Manitoba, the kids greet me. 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds greet me with signs saying they want a recreation. They want a gym. They want a school. They want a place to play. Those are the kinds of signs that little kids they show to me when I arrive in their villages. And so there is a youth-led national forum on suicide coming up soon that is being led by Indigenous young people. We're having a major national health forum in November. And so there are both structural things that need to occur in our relationship with the federal government when the health accord is up for renegotiations, knowing that we've come from this deep era that has resulted in tremendous trauma in our communities, mental health challenges. Well, we need to be addressing those. And so we expect that days like today and tomorrow on Parliament Hill, we'll be bringing those messages. We're bringing those messages to the provincial and territorial premiers. Thankfully, they've been very receptive as well. But again, I reiterate that unless this becomes supported by a more popular movement, unless we're helping to break down those barriers in Canadian society, there's the potential to revert to a fear-based relationship that is based on narrow politics on Parliament Hill. And whereas what we really need is an all-hands-on-deck effort here that crosses political and partisan lines. So I hope that it goes some way in responding to the question. It's really about removing ourselves from the isolation of one another and more vigorously engaging in understanding each other.
Hello, how's it going? Good. Sorry, my name's Graham Schoenfield, and I have a question that sort of ties on to that one. Just at the very end there, you mentioned, how youth would come up with signs that saying like, we want a recreation program or facility. How do you think is the best approach to bring youth programs to these small communities in, let's say, Northern Ontario?
I think probably reaching out and asking the young people. I know very often we have, as you heard earlier, there's various formally organized youth-led committees and organizations, including the Assembly of First Nations has a National Youth Council. And sometimes they help to facilitate connections with youth leaders and with chief and councils and with existing organizations that are in communities. And I know that increasingly we see exchanges occurring between communities in the urban setting. Having young people come to see a university like this and be supported to explore it in all levels of education, because absolutely we need to set the expectations and support the expectations to be high. Don't set expectations too high. We want to dash the notion that it's achievable. It's time that we actually moved away, and that's a status quo that we've got to smash. We now need to start supporting the expectations. It's 49% K-12 graduation rate now. What's wrong with us pushing for 100% graduation rates in our communities across the country? How do we achieve that? Well, it can begin by yourself and other peers recognizing and reaching out, and then listening to the young people and hearing from them what their aspirations are, and maybe hearing from them what things they want to see occur in their community and how they want to see the relationship emerge. It is no different than the relationship with the federal government, whereby we have federal government seeking to determine for us what they feel is best, seeking to impose values on our communities. We have our values. We have a way of describing ourselves that we want to see realized and supported. So there are also many very tangible projects, though, and programs that seek to do exactly what you're aspiring to do. And many of them are already established within our communities, like the one I described, where we have, it's called the Upsiuk Initiative, a leadership initiative that works with the...
Sorry, what's it called?
Well, it's called the Leadership Initiative. The actual phrase in our language is called upsiuk, which is going the right way. And it's a consortium of academic leadership, business, industry, youth leaders, working with communities to support their aspirations. So it's a community-led initiative and development. There are a number of these specific initiatives that if you and others who are interested, we could share those with you, but would welcome your ideas as well and welcome your energy to determine how best to accomplish that. But I really appreciate that because we've got important work to do around the world and that goes on. But we also have important work to do right here in Canada to support some of these, especially young people in these very isolated communities. And of course it can feel very isolating in the big cities as well. And our people in the cities need that support too.
Thank you for letting some of the people here know about the early contacts and that there were good relationships with trade and stuff. And it seems when you live in a bureaucratic society that we call Canada today, when anything that has to do with the federal government, there has to be a mutual interest. And that's the only way you can initiate the federal government to want to work with you. If our population is less than 1% of the vote of the federal elections, how do we entice Canada to understand our ideas and work with us? And at the same time, how do we get our people to come to that level to make those initiatives happen? And what kind of variables would you put in that formula?
There's the big question to conclude on. It's a very good question, and I'm glad that you're asking it. And it's one that we have to help answer together. I think back to how major change has occurred in other movements, whether it's the women who, along with their families, were dispossessed from their lands in the interior of South America and lived in the barrios of Rio de Janeiro, as sparking the advancements of women's rights as they fought for basic clean drinking water in the outside slums of places like Rio, as they tried to care for their children, their families, while their husbands, by and large, went off into the factories. Or the 12 people who gathered in a printing shop in London, England, and who said, this practice of slavery is not okay. How remarkable it is that so often it's those moments that where there is a deep desire amongst a few even to spark a significant change. Or those who went to the lunch counters during the civil rights movement in the United States, confronting the fear of others about the unknown, going into sitting down on the bus or going into a lunch counter. Or what about our people, the struggles that our people, even in my lifetime, watching my father with some fury in his belly, challenging the institution, give me your toughest because I'll take them on, I'll take them all on.
I will too.
You will too, I know you will. And so there is some sentiment about that, the struggles that we're undertaking. We have in our respective cultures stories of our peoples having gone through struggles. We have teachings about how to make our way through those struggles. And at this juncture in history, who knows, Alder alluded, why we've gone through what we did. Why we faced what we faced over the course of recent history. And, those are some of the mysteries that were left. We also, though, have, I think, an opportunity at this juncture in history to say, well, what can be? We know what was. Together, through lectures like this, through work such as what the university is doing, we are describing what is, so that together we can design what can be. That is, in essence, the task that we have before us. How to accomplish those changes, we can certainly tear a strip from other movements. Until Al Gore, many of us sat in front of his film, was the issue of climate change so at the forefront. I took his training up in Montreal. I was one of 250 trainers that was taught by Al Gore, and I'll have to be honest, not so much because of an issue that I care deeply about, but because I was really interested in major change movements in the history and recent history of our people. And how does the issue of Indigenous peoples, not only within Canada, but globally fit into that? Whether it's those Indigenous people being displaced in in South America, or I marched with 24 Adivasi, landless poor people in India who represent 80 million who have been dispossessed of their lands and are living in deep poverty, who share similar stories as we do. So how do we accomplish these changes? That's what departments that think deeply about policy contemplate. And I certainly believe strongly that when we're such a small percentage of the national population, that it certainly has been part of the reason for the great struggle. While your people don't vote, I'm told so often in Ottawa, forgetting, as we can sometimes do, the sovereign nature of Indigenous peoples, the nation-to-nation relationship, and the complexities that brings. And some say, well, it's too complex. We'll just leave it over there because I can't figure it out. No, that's not okay. It's for us to unpack. We have to collectively understand the reality so that everyone can understand and see this reality, and certainly will arrive from our own mutual perspectives. But upon accomplishing that, then design a way forward. So I will continue to do my responsibility. I will continue to put the bug in the ear of people like Prime Minister Harper, speak to him the way that the elders describe. He's a father. I'm a father. I want the best for my children as I know he wants the best for his children. In some respects, it's difficult to be okay with the fact that a singular person could, to themselves, dictate what happens in Canadian history when it comes to the very lives of the people that we're talking about. But let's not leave him alone on that. Let's not leave Parliament alone on it. Let's embrace this issue and this challenge, all of us. Institutions of higher learning, especially those who are engaged in their studies, you are, in my personal opinion, most powerfully placed to facilitate the kind of change that we require. It just needs to be struck perhaps by an effort on Twitter or on Facebook, because the power of communication, and our people are the highest per capita users of social networking in this country. I know, I get earfuls all the time, trust me. I pay attention, and I do listen. When you send out your tweets, I do read them. I do hear what it is that you're saying. I hear the encouragement. I hear the shares of pain and the share of struggles as well. How can we turn the power of that kind of ability into something that compels Canada to smash the status quo, that encourages politicians to work with us to design policy responses and approaches that work for all of us? That's the change that I believe is doable at this juncture in history in this generation.
Thank you.
There's a presentation. Thank you. It was an honor to listen to you, to share your knowledge with us. We're honored by your presence. On display in the Faculty of Public Affairs is a plaque which commemorates the Catherine A.H. Graham Lecture in Aboriginal Policy Series, so we're very privileged to include your name next to Mary May Simons as the second distinguished speaker in this series, and I'm delighted to present this to you and to our guests.
Wow.
Thank you to all of you for being here this